Let's just quickly go over the agenda. I'm going to introduce what the Security Navigator is and why we do it. Then Charles is going to introduce us to the kind of greater story arc of the Security Navigator and some of the data points in the interpretation. Then Jörg is going to take us through some of the challenge questions that might be useful for you if you address an audience with some information from the Security Navigator. And hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes for questions in the end. Okay, so first things first, the Security Navigator, what is it? Well, in short, the Security Navigator is our annual security report. We've been publishing a Security Navigator for the past 5 years. Basically, this is edition number 7, technically, because we had 2 in the first year. But anyway, we do it on a yearly basis, and we usually do it in December, so to make sure that we are the first ones to come out with a security report for the following year. In terms of the data that we look at, in the Security Navigator, we have some data that is from our security research team, from the CERT, but also from our operations like SOC, CyberSOC, VOC operations. So it's really a nice showcase of all our capabilities in terms of intelligence, but also in terms of service delivery. So why do we do a Security Navigator? It's a fact that we actually do have some deep insight into the security landscape. That comes from our threat intelligence. That's really one of our USPs. We have those capabilities that smaller players usually can't afford even to have. So we are also not generalists. We are really experts in a lot of aspects, and basically in all aspects that are related to security in terms of IT. And we are also a truly global player, but at the same time capable of delivering locally on a very kind of tailored approach. And this local approach is something that actually does set us apart also from other competitors. Unfortunately, it's also a fact that these factors are pretty hard to demonstrate, because basically everyone can claim that they have significant research capabilities and a deep insight into threat intelligence. So how do you actually prove that? And the answer is we prove that by publishing content. So we are publishing white papers, we are publishing reports, we are publishing serious research results in respected events like, for example, the RSA or the Black Hat. And that comes with a couple of benefits. So first of all, the press is more likely to quote us with some of the relevant data that we can provide. It's going to boost our credibility and popularity. It's more powerful than classic advertising, because in a world where basically everyone is confronted with advertising all the time and is pushed to people kind of right in front of their faces, people tend to kind of turn on a filter and try to filter out too aggressive marketing. And on the other hand, we actually see that it is actually quite credible if you are providing some information in a situation where people can actually make use of it. So following that, we actually have seen that, for example, the annual 2025 B2B content consumption and demand report that's published by Netline gives us an indication that C-levels are consuming 27% more content than last year. So we do see that people are after valuable content, but we have to make sure that it actually is valuable. And the Security Navigator is our key piece of content marketing. So just in terms of some of the numbers that make up the Security Navigator, it's really a tremendous success story. We see that in comparison to Security Navigator 2024, which previously was the most successful Security Navigator we ever published, we again kind of managed to significantly scale up our success. So we have 6,233 downloads as of this morning of Security Navigator 2025, which is really remarkable. Then what is even more impressive is the tracked opportunity pipeline that we can assign to the Security Navigator. We have 106 million tracked opportunities when featuring in other campaigns, and the total sum of all influence opportunities is at 208 million euros this year, which is again also a significant increase over the already quite good numbers from last year. How do we get those numbers? Well, basically we get them from Salesforce. So whenever someone actually creates an opportunity, then we match the people in the on the customer side who are involved with the opportunity with our database of people who have interacted with some of our marketing material, and we automatically make that match. So when someone actually has downloaded the Security Navigator and becomes part of an opportunity, then we assign a fraction of that opportunity to be influenced by the Security Navigator. So basically that gives us a good understanding of how people are consuming our marketing material, like for example the Security Navigator, and then later turn into opportunities. So this is really a great result, and it shows that basically we are not just doing the Security Navigator for fun, we are really making an impact. And you will find the Security Navigator in the beginning of a lot of successful sales stories. Just a quick look at the audience. Who's reading the Security Navigator? We see that there's quite a lot of management there, which is kind of a little bit unexpected, but we do see security executives, of course, CISOs, CIOs, CSOs, who are involved with security and technology, but also we see a strong fraction of the audience is the analysts, security experts, the practitioners, basically, from our field. But we also see some other C-levels and directors that are actually consuming Security Navigator. What's the purpose of reading? We see that a lot of them are actually reading it for awareness and education, which is basically the intended purpose. But what's kind of surprised us a little bit when conducting that audience survey is that a lot of people, actually about a third of our readers, are using the Security Navigator to help them make strategic and technical decisions. So that is really a pleasant surprise, because it means that basically we're not just kind of throwing data at our audience. It actually does help them to drive more educated business decisions. And that's really something that we actually need to build on, because it gives us a good opportunity to get into the kind of perception of the audience as the trusted advisor that we want to be. Something that's also remarkable is how they actually compare us to other reports like the Verizon DBIR. And again, to our delight, we found that a third of the audience sees us at least on par with those industry reports, but actually 60% say that we are better than those kind of standard security reports that everyone consumes. So that's, again, speaking to the quality of the asset. A quick note on some other aspects. The Security Navigator is kind of technical in nature. It is a research paper, and as such, it addresses a very technical and very kind of expert audience. So the Security Navigator is for security experts, for security practitioners, for management that is actually involved in technical function with security or technology in some way. So as I said, CISOs, security directors, other executives, well, it might be a little bit technical for them. So we actually have a spin-off report that's called the Security Navigator for Business Leaders, which is going to be published in January. And that is based on the Security Navigator 2026 data, but it actually digests it in a little bit more different way, in a more kind of strategic way, and kind of gets less technical but more on the advisory part, and that is the Security Navigator for Business Leaders that's coming up. So this is probably the one that is addressing other directors which are not directly involved with security or technology. So what can you do with the Security Navigator? Charles and Jot are going to give us a more deep dive into that. But in general, what you can do is you can challenge, you can inform, and you can inspire an audience with Security Navigator data. And that is really something that actually makes it useful for you on a day-to-day basis. So for the details and walking you slightly through some of the content in the Security Navigator, I hand over now to Charles. And we'll just stop presenting.
Thank you, Franz, and hello, everybody. My apologies in advance. I'm at a public space. I hope the background noise isn't too bad. But as Franz said, we're excited. The Navigator comes out this week. It's been a long journey for us, and we think it's packed full of interesting insights and valuable conversations for you to have with your clients. And together with Jort, we're going to get into some of those conversations, specifically kind of door openers that you could surface with your clients. But I want to start by sharing what for me was, I think, the most interesting emergent thread. So look at all the data and we pull it out. What does this all mean? Is this idea that security is a kind of wartime mentality, suggesting anyone should go to war, that we are at war. But I think that there's something about how we think about problems, how we think about our challenges when we're at war that might be useful for us. And I'm going to present that argument to you basically in 3 stages. There are 4 stages. The first is to say that although in the Navigator we identify and discuss several different threat actors, really if you consider them carefully, you'll see that they start to kind of morph into a single adversary. So really one kind of thing that is impacting us in a unified way. The second thing that emerges when you look at the Navigator and what's happening around us is that the damage caused to our societies and our economies, and even to individuals, cyber is increasing us in very real way. And thirdly, when I say us, it is the collective now, that the impact cyber attacks, cyber incidents is an impact on economies and on societies, on your neighbors and on families. It's not an impact that can be individualized down to specific people who accidentally clicked on a link or specific businesses whose backups didn't work. There is a collective us. And finally, we make the point in the Navigator that if you start to see that there's an adversary and there's an us, and that the adversary is inflicting damage on us, then what emerges is this wartime mentality that kind of encourages us to think about problems in a different way, think about the threat in a different way, how we respond to it. Apologies for that background noise again. So let's start with that actor. Just let this woman finish. So one we're able to share in this year's Navigator for the first time is a study that we did 100 law enforcement actions against cyber criminals. And in this study, we can examine who law enforcement targeted, what the action was that they took, kind of what crime they were prosecuting, and then also something about the criminals themselves, their age, their gender, their country of location, etc. This is the first time a study like this has been done anywhere in the world. Diana and our team led it, and we're extremely excited about its value. But the one thing it surfaces very clearly is that there are these concentrated clusters where these bad guys are located. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more to study about this, but it can't be denied that when we know enough about a cyber attack to be able to actually pursue the adversary, then we'll notice that that adversary sits in what we call states. This emergent concept, definable them, right? There's
Sorry,
or a
Charles,
space out
you
there
keep
where these
breaking
attacks
up.
are.
I think your connection is pretty bad at the moment, Charles. Not sure if you have access to some area where you have better Wi-Fi connection. It's actually quite difficult to understand.
I agree.
You muted yourself, Charles, just I'm not sure if you know.
Sorry, everyone. France, no, my connection is perfect. I don't think there's anything I can do about it. It might just be the internet. Tell you what, give me 1 minute. Try something. But I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hopefully
I can
that's
hear
a
you.
little bit better. Can you hear me now, France? All right, my apologies, everyone. So we see this concentration of threat actors in these adversarial zones, right? That's like very apparent that's happening. Then the next thing we do in the Navigator is to study different categories of threat actors, and these are broad differentiations, right? They're broad categories, but I think they're representative. These are the kinds of actors that we see: state-backed actors, hacktivists, and cyber extortionists or cyber criminals. And we explore each of them in the Navigator through different lenses, right? There's a lot said about the activities of these actors. But what I want to discuss here or highlight here is their similarities, how similar all of them are in many ways. Firstly, we saw this concentration of these actors in adversary states, right? So all these actors, state-backed hacktivists and criminals, tend to come from in regions. Another thing that's very clearly similar is the techniques and tactics that they use. Although we associate state actors with very advanced and sophisticated techniques, if we look at incidents like Volt Typhoon, which targeted telcos, they didn't use sophisticated techniques. They were using the same techniques as criminal actors. And then if we look at the sort of cultural alignments, what we see is, of course, the state-backed actors are state integrated, right? They're managed by the states. The hacktivist actors are state aligned, but possibly also state coordinated. And then the cyber extortionists are tolerated and maybe even coordinated by the state. So it's not apolitical. Even the criminals, they're not apolitical. They all have an alignment and are being tolerated in these kind of safe harbor states. And then finally, if we look at the impacts, what we see is that although, of course, state actors will focus more on collecting intelligence and criminal actors will focus more on financial gain, there is a thread across all of them, which is that all of them impact the target societies economically, and all of them impact those victim societies in terms of the spread of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Right? There's cognitive impacts that we've been talking about for a while now. And so what emerges is that there's this kind of converged ecosystem of criminals and hacktivists and state operators that actually acts as an almost coherent pressure system. So collectively, all three of those factors act on the communities that they're targeting to create enormous financial and economic stress, and to create enormous societal discord, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So there seems to be an emergent kind of them. And then there's also a kind of us. And the first part of the us that I want to highlight is that when we look at the victims of cybercrime, one of the very clear things we see, and it's increasingly clear, is that really the victims are the small and the weak. Small and medium businesses represent almost 70% of all victims of cyber extortion now. And that number is growing, right? It's growing faster for small and medium businesses than it is for large businesses. So although the media and of course commercial entities like ours are interested in the big businesses that have got lots of money, the real impact is being felt on the mom and pop shops, the small businesses, and essentially on small but important parts of the supply chain, which brings us to the next point that the Navigator surfaces, which is just the continued vulnerability of the supply chain and how it is increasingly being attacked and impacted. This year, we saw notable attacks against Salesloft Drift and against the NPM software ecosystem via the Shai Hulud worm. Those were examples of supply chain risk. But really, the point that we try and surface is that there is a web of interdependency across an economy, and all businesses, all institutions play a role in that web. And so when small businesses are impacted, the whole economy is impacted also, and the other way around, right? When big businesses are impacted, small ones are impacted. But there is a societal impact that results from security failures across the supply chain. And then finally, in the Navigator, we talk a lot, as we have been for the last year, about the impact of security on politics and digital sovereignty. And there's a real awareness that technology is used as a means to project soft power, and is being used as a means to project soft power, not just through hacking, but by managing platforms, by racing to control technologies, by racing to control digital inflection points, and increasingly that technology power is being turned into a kind of political power, like we saw, for example, when the US threatened to deny Ukraine access to Starlink during their negotiations. And so collectively, what emerges from these threads in the Navigator is this idea that there is a kind of an us, and that us is defined not only by who our adversaries are, but by our ecosystems and our supply chains, and by the way we codepend on technologies in order to run our societies. And then we make the point that the damage in all of these instances and all of these security failures is really perceptible. It's a tangible damage. And of course, the poster child for that damage this year was the attack against Jaguar Land Rover in August of this year. And I just want to, I know probably everybody's heard about this attack and its implications, but I just want to point it out to you again, remind you of some of these figures, because they're really quite astounding. So the business was hit at the end of August by a group called Scattered Lapsus Hunters. It was forced to close down at least some of its factories for as long as 5 weeks, losing incidentally about £50 million a week. The total direct cost was almost £200 million. That £200 million translated to about £500 million of business loss in the second quarter of this year. That's in comparison to a profit that they reported for the same period in the previous year. 33,000 employees negatively affected, and a supply chain comprising 100,000 organizations with 100,000 staff also disrupted, also with fears about layoffs, forced to pause operations, uncertainty if they'd get their money. So much so that the UK government, for the first time ever, has promised to underwrite a £1.5 billion loan to guarantee Jaguar Land Rover so it can continue to support its suppliers. So I think this story very clearly indicates how cyber impacts can have societal effects. And the scary thing is that these numbers are from one incident. The incidents themselves continue growing at really, somewhat depressing rates. From when we started tracking cyber extortion in 2020, the number of victims per year has almost tripled. In fact, from 2025 to a comparable period in 2024, the increase is 45%. The number of threat actors has also tripled, and the efficiency of the threat actors has also become higher. So this is it feels like a bombardment. In the Navigator, of course, we describe the regional changes. As we've been predicting for some time, it's the less impacted regions that are being affected more. But all of the big, strong economies continue to show robust growth in this domain. The only exception perhaps being the UK, where there was a slight contraction, and we believe that was as a result of law enforcement successfully disrupting some of the major gangs that really enjoyed targeting the UK in the past. If we strip out the UK and the US and Canada and the other big English-speaking economies, we note that Germany is the most impacted economy, followed by Italy and France. Spain is up there. So is Belgium and Switzerland and the Netherlands. And sort of towards the bottom of the list, you'll see smaller economies like South Africa also being impacted. But if we reverse the logic, and instead of counting the number of victims in a country, we ask ourselves, how many victims were impacted relative to the size of that country? Then we start to see these small economies like Lebanon and Jamaica surfacing as the most impacted. South Africa starts bubbling towards the top of that list, and even smaller European economies like Belgium presents as being very heavily impacted by this crime relative to the size of its economy. So cyber extortion is still the big gorilla in terms of the threat landscape, but its impacts are increasingly societal and large scale in terms of our economies. So I hope I've convinced you that there does seem to be a sort of consolidated adversary across the different threat actor categories. And I hope I've convinced you that the impact is real and that the impact is broadly felt across economies and societies. The thought I want to leave you with is, how would we act differently if we did perceive ourselves to be in conflict? And of course, there's a case study for that in the form of Ukraine, who is fighting off an invasion, both in the real world and in cyberspace. And what we can see from Ukraine is what emerges when a society feels itself attacked is that it surfaces mostly an attitude of collectivism and volunteerism. What Ukraine has done very well is to take that collectivist and volunteerist spirit and turn it into professional and formal structures, so that people who want to step in the struggle are enabled to do so and directed in terms of how their efforts and skills and energies can best be brought to use. But the thing to take away is that in a wartime mindset, when you see your neighbor's building is on fire, then what you do is you go and help your neighbor put the fire out. You don't say, well, okay, we're okay, we haven't been hit, but let's review our fire security processes fire safety processes. And with that, what I want to do is to give some space to Jort to speak a little bit about how these themes that emerge from the Navigator can be turned into more concrete technical discussions with your clients.
Thank you, Charles. Hello, my name is Jort Collery. I'm a strategic advisor in the Netherlands. And some years ago, we were already talking about how can we leverage the completeness of a security navigator, because it's very valuable. It contains a lot of information with a lot of credits to Charles' team. But how do you gonna bring over the message to across the table? And I did that together, and also the credits for Matthijs van der Wel ter Wil, is to find some questions that you can challenge with your clients. And the first one is the famous one, the big gorilla, and that's all about cyber extortion. And it is still here. It is not changing. It's increasing if you look at the numbers that Charles showed you. Cyber extortion has changed a lot. Where it was only focused on ransomware, and now it's also included with DDoS, but also data exfiltration. There are different ways to extort an organization. And that's because we live in an interconnected world, and it's all about continuity. But that increases the chance to be victimized from SciEx. And that's something that Charles brought in 2023. And that also concludes for your partners and your suppliers. So it's important to have a common strategy to minimize the attacks and that you get hit by cyber extortion. Next slide. So this is also an interesting, the geopolitics that are pressuring all kinds of countries around the globe. So state actors and your critical infrastructure are under pressure. And we see that a lot with not only ransomware being deployed, but also with the increase of wipers, destructionware, that organizations don't need to be in conflict to suffer from collateral damage. And that's an interesting one, because then you need to focus on reducing the blast radius, so that you don't get victimized from a wiper or destructionware that is happening in your country. And it's also good to know what kind of frameworks are you adopting to prevent that? And do you have cyber threat intelligence, for example, to combat and get also knowledge from that? Next slide, please. And Charles was already talking about the blurred lines of where hacktivism is currently in. And hacktivism was quite some years only the digital graffiti groups who were in the past making statements on such like environment or political statements, but they have changed, and you have seen that hacktivists mostly support state actors in their cyber warfare that they are performing. So if you are under pressure and you don't know what to do, you might get hit by the blast of the radius. And that's interesting because most organizations that we still see, they need to fix the basic hygiene. And if you don't have fixed that, you will become a victim from that. So supply chain weaknesses. We all know what happened with SolarWinds. That was the first, big news about the supply chain attack. And again, I'm going to say it, these days we live in an interconnected world where third-party risk management has become a crucial component for organizations. They need to assess the third-party management. Because if you're connected with your partners and suppliers, you might get hit as well. And maybe you're not the end goal, but you're the ultimate goal, ultimate gateway, and vice versa. So in the incident response plan that you have needs to add also an item on the supply chain. Because the question, how do you manage your supply chain risk? And most of the organizations are only focusing on themselves and not beyond. Yeah, and with technology and politics, digital sovereignty, yeah, it has become more interesting. Because it's not only that you have to defend yourself, it's also a matter that you need to choose what kind of vendor am I going to choose. So basically, every organization operates within the web of geopolitics. And the challenges that organizations have is based on 3 streams. That's business, that's technology, and the ever-evolving threat landscape. And they are both moving away. So if your business is changing, it is also affecting the technology. And if technology is changing, the business might change as well. But the threat landscape is ever evolving. So you need to adapt on those 3 to be consistent and also focused on cybersecurity. So the question here is, how do you ensure continuity for your organization? And I've seen it many times. And also in the Netherlands, where we eat a lot of cheese, there was 2 supermarkets that got hit. And the challenge they had was that there was not any cheese in the supermarket. And that because one of the logistics partners got ransomware. So the cheese was all in the warehouses and did not end up in the supermarket. And that's an interesting case that the supermarkets also going to look at who is my logistics partner? And maybe do I need 2 logistics partners? Maybe I need to spread out my my challenges that I have within my organization.
So thank you, Jort. One of the themes that again emerges in the Navigator this year, but that doesn't get covered by that wartime mentality mindset, although I guess it could, it falls a little bit under politics, is of course the theme of AI. And this year was another big year for AI from a security point of view. And in the Navigator, we kind of revisit our old perspectives on it, but also examine some of the newer developments. The newer developments are, of course, that predictably, AI is being used by the adversary, by both state and criminal actors, and being used in the ways that you would kind of expect, developing phishing mails, writing disinformation content, helping write code, helping develop malware. But in truth, probably nothing that would shake our foundations. Until very late in the year, it was Anthropic described an attack they were tracking in which AI was used to orchestrate an entire attack from end to end with almost no human intervention. Still not at the level that we think changes the game, but definitely there's a trajectory there involving the adoption of AI by adversaries. And definitely for the foreseeable future, we see AI supporting the adversaries more than it supports the defenders in the short term. We also highlight some examples on the Navigator of recent compromises in which AI was targeted. That's something we predicted last year, and we're seeing it very viscerally, that AI systems, especially when they get integrated into enterprise IT, become very heavily targeted. And that is leading now to compromises, not directly by the model being hacked, but by the model's relationships with the rest of technology being exploited. But then my colleague Vickers also does a really good job in the Navigator of expanding on some of the other risks. And those are mostly business-related risks and geopolitical risks. So both Jort and I have mentioned this issue of geopolitics and sovereignty already as a security concern. And that's very true for AI also, where the AI arms race is going to surface a small number of mega providers. What we anticipate is that other providers will fall by the wayside, and that leaves businesses exposed from a continuity point of view on the one hand, or exposed to political leverage on the other hand. And I think the takeaway line we use there is that AI in the hands of the attacker is bad. AI in the hands of the defender might help, but the real question is not how we defend ourselves against attackers with AI, but how we defend ourselves against AI itself. And so, Jort, I think you've got some questions about that theme also.
So AI, yeah, workhorse, weapon or weakness. I really love the title. It's a big question. AI, you can't deny it. It's being used everywhere. And not only in the private environment, but also in the business environment. And the challenges are that how does the advancement of this new technology compare with the development and constant changes in privacy and security? Because AI is not all about privacy, it's all about security. How do you kind of protect your organization from influences from the outside? So what precautions on security and privacy have you already taken in your organization? I asked that question many times, and there isn't an organization that is answering that correctly or well with confidence. So interesting to talk about AI.
Thanks, Jort. And then we introduced this year in the Navigator something that's a little bit kind of outside of our usual domain, but we felt was too important to ignore, which was the emergence of what's called the remote worker threat. And it really started with a report by KnowBe4, the security vendor KnowBe4, late in last year, where they reported that they'd hired someone to work remotely, appointed them, vetted them, the whole thing, and then sent them a laptop. And as soon as their laptop got connected to the network, they detected that it was distributing malware. And it turned out that the person that they'd hired wasn't who they thought it was at all. It was an entirely fake persona that was set up in a so-called laptop factory in America, but was being run by an entirely different individual in North Korea. So they had hired somebody fake. And that trend as a way of just earning money, firstly, but secondly, as a way of inserting or gaining access to enterprises has grown over the year. Out of the US into Europe and out of the tech industry into other industries also. It's a very complex problem that touches on many challenges in the security space. And so I think it makes for an interesting conversation to have with your customers also.
Thank you, Charles. Inside out, the remote worker threat, I would call that also the insider. I always talk about 4 types of threats. That's the opportunist, the insider threat, the hacker, and the professional attacker. And this is about the insider. And the insider is conscious or unconscious behavior of an employee that is motivated by financial issues or personal gain, but is also aiming for promotion maybe, or moving to a competitor. On the psychological side of the actions of an insider threat, that could be based on resentment or revenge. And next to the KnowBe4 example, I would address that there's another example with CrowdStrike, and it happened, I think, a little bit of 1 week or 10 days ago. And it was an attempt by an insider threat to provide SSO cookies to get in exchange $25,000. And that's a huge amount of money. And we have seen that in the Netherlands as well as an example, where the insider threat